Well, let's keep sharing some information, more wisdom, more knowledge for everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Now I want to share another book, War of Revolution. The Plot Against Civilizations by Nesta, Webster. Edited and brought up to date by Anthony Giddings. World Revolution, The Plot Against Civilization by Nesta H. Webster. Mrs. Arthur Webster, author of The French Revolution and Studying Democracy, The Cavalier de Dauphin, etc. Boston Small, Maynard and Company Publishers. Si les hommes comprennent la révolution adjourne, oui, elle finira demain. Joseph de Maistre en 1811. Les personnes qui ignorent la véritable situation des choses et el nombre en este grand, is imagining que les sociétés secrètes ont pour objet a alliance des peuples contre les rois, est une erreur capitale. Les sociétés secrètes sont ennemies des uns et des autres. Elles flattent les passions, elles excitent les divisions, les haines, les vengeances, mais incestent à leur profit, au plutôt à celui de quelques habitués qui ne voudront détrôner le roi que pour mieux opprimer les sujets. Lombard de Langre en 1819. Printed in the United States of America, copyright 1921 by a Small Maynard and Company, Incorporated. Author's note: in reply to numerous inquiries as to whether the statements I made in the French Revolution have since been disproved, I take this opportunity to say that, as far as I am aware, no one has attempted to bring forward any contrary evidence. The socialist press was completely silent. Wells' hostile reviewers in the general press contented themselves with saying the work was biased, but without quoting chapter and verse in support of this assertion. My book was not intended to be the last word of the French Revolution, but the first attempt in English to tell the truth, and had my view on any essential point being shown to be erroneous, I should have been perfectly ready to readjust it in further editions. Not such an honest challenge was made. However, my opponents, preferring the method of creating prejudice against my work by attributing to me views I never expressed. Thus, at the moment of this book going to press, it has been brought to my notice that I am represented as having attacked British Freemasonry. This can only have been said in malice, as I have always clearly differentiated between British and continental Masonry, showing the former to be an honorable association not only hostile to subversive doctrines, but a strong supporter of law, order, and religion. See the French Revolution, page 20 and 492. I am in fact indebted to certain distinguished British Masons for valuable help and advice in my work, which I here gratefully acknowledge. Forward. Amongst all the books, pamphlets, and newspaper articles that are now devoted to the world revolution through which we are passing, it is strange to notice how little scientific investigation is being brought to bear on the origins of the movement. A frequent explanation advanced, and I believe the most fallacious, is that the present unrest must be attributed to war awareness, human nature. We are told, exasperated by the protracted horror of the recent international conflict, has become the victim of a crisis the nerves, which finds its expression in worldwide discontent. In support of this theory, we are reminded that former wars have likewise been followed by periods of social disturbance, and that by a process of analogy the symptoms may be expected to subside as the strain of war is relieved. in the same manner as they have subsided hitherto. It is true that political conflicts between nations have frequently in the past been followed by social upheavals, that the Napoleonic Wars by industrial troubles in England, the Franco-Prussian War by revolutionary agitation not only in the land of the conquered, but of the conquerors, but to regard this social manifestation as the direct outcome of the preceding international conflict, it is to mistake contributing for fundamental causes. Revolution is not the product of war, but a malady that the nation suffering from the after effects of what is most likely to develop. Just a man enfeebled by fatigue is more liable to contract disease than one who is in a state of perfect vigor. Yet this predisposing cause is by no means essential to the outbreak of revolutionary fever. The Great French Revolution was not immediately preceded by a war of any magnitude, and to the observant mind, England in 1914 was as near to revolution as in 1919. The intervening World War, far from producing the explosion in this country, merely retarded it by a rallying citizens of all classes around the standard of national defense. World Revolution. 8. World Revolution. The truth is that for the last 145 years, the fire of revolution has moldered steadily beneath the ancient structure of civilization, and already at moments has burst out into flame, threatening to destroy to its very foundation that social edifice which 18 centuries have been spending constructing. The crisis of today is then no development of modern times, but a mere continuation of the immense movement that began in the middle of the 18th century. In a word, it is all one and the same revolution, the revolution that found its first expression in France of 1789. Both in its nature and its aims are different entirely from former revolution which had for their origin some localized or temporary cause. The revolution through which we are now passing is not local but universal. It is not political but social, and its cause must be sought not in popular discontent but in a deep-laid conspiracy that used the people to their own undoing. In order to follow its course, we must realize the dual nature of the movement by studying concurrently the outward revolutionary forces of socialism, anarchism, etc., and the hiding power behind them as indicated in the chart accompanying this work. The present writer believes that hitherto no book has been written on precisely these lines. Many valuable works has been devoted to secret societies, others to the surface history of revolution, but none so far has attempted to trace the connection between the two in the form of a continuous narrative. The object of this book is therefore to describe not only the evolution of socialist and anarchist ideas and their effects in succeeding revolutionary outbreaks, but at the same time to follow the working of that occult force, terrible, unchanging, relentless, and wholly destructive, which constitutes the greatest menace that has ever confronted the human race. Parts of chapters 1 and 3 appear in the 9th, 10th century and after, and certain later passages in the Morning Post. Contents. Chapter 1, page 1, Illuminism. The philosophers, Rousseau, secret societies, Freemasonry, Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminati Congress of Wilmsbad, Illuminati suppressed. Chapter 2, the First French Revolution, Illuminism in France, Cagliostro, Mirabeau, intrigues over Prussia, the Orleanists, the reign of terror, clothes and internationalism, Robespierre and socialism, the plan of the population after effects of revolution. Chapter 3, the conspiracy of Babeuf, Gracchus Babeuf, the Pantheonistes, manifesto of the equal system of Babeuf, plan of the conspirators, the great day of the people, discovery of the plot execution of Webster's Illuminism in England, Ireland, the United Irishmen, Banchivei Illuminism in America. Chapter 4, the growth of socialism, revival of Illuminism, the Tugendonbund, the Alta Vendita, the Industrial Revolution, role of the Jews, the philosophers Robert Owen, New Harmony, Saint Simon, Pierre Leroux, Fourier Butches, Louis Blanc, David Vidal, Picard Proudhon, Trade Union, Terrorism. World Revolution, Chapter 5, the Revolution of 1848. Russian secret societies, the Decabrests rise in the French Revolution of 1830, the bourgeoisies before 1848, the secret society apathy of the government, the outbreak of February fall of the monarchy, the Social Democratic Republic, national workshops, association of working men, the 17th of March, the 16th of April, the 15th of May, the days of June, reaction, the European conflagration. Chapter 6, the International, role of the Jews in Germany, German social democracy, Lassalle, Karl Marx, Hegel, Russian anarchy, Michael Bakunin, the Working Men's Association, intrigues of Marx, the alliance of social democracy, Bakunin and the German Jew Company. Chapter 7, the Revolution of 1871, the Franco-Prussian War, internationalism, Karl Marx, Pan-Germanist, the Commune, conflict between Marx and Bakunin, end of the International. Chapter 8, the course of anarchy, nihilism in Russia, murder of Alexander II, the revival Illuminati, Johann Most Revolutionary Congress in London, anarchist outrages in Western Europe, Fenianism, British socialism. Chapter 9, syndicalism, quarrels among socialists, the old guilds, revolutionary syndicalism, outcome of anarchy, the general strike, George Orwell, syndicalism versus socialism, Gall Socialism, New Australia. Contest, Chapter 10, the Revolution of 1970, the Great War, role of British socialists, role of German Social Democrats, the Russian Revolution, Bolshevik, role of the Jews, the Protocols of Nilus, German organization. Conclusion, Bolshevism in England, our Illuminati danger now, threatening civilization, methods of defense. Chapter 1, Illuminism, the philosophers, Rousseau, secret societies, Freemasonry, Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminati Congress of Wilmsbad, Illuminati suppressed. It is commonly accepted opinion that the Great Revolutionary Movement, which began at the end of the 18th century, originated with the philosophers of France, particularly with Rousseau. This is only to state half the case. Rousseau was not the originator of his doctrines, and if we were to seek the cause of revolution in the more philosophy, it would be necessary to go a great deal farther back than Rousseau, to Mably, to the Utopia of Thomas More, and even to Pythagoras and Plato. At the same time, it is undoubtedly true that Rousseau was the principal medium through which the doctrines of these early philosophers were brought home to the intelligentsias of 18th century France, and that this contract, social and discourse, sur a origin de inégalite parmi les hommes, contain the germs of modern socialism in all its forms. The theory of Rousseau that was the most important bearing on the theme of this book may be expressed in the colloquial phrase that civilization is all wrong, and that salvation for the human race lies in a return to nature. According to Rousseau, civilization had proved the bane of humanity. In his primitive state, man was free and happy. Only under the paralyzing influence of social restraints had his liberty been curtailed, whilst to the laws of property alone was due to the fact that a larger proportion of mankind had fallen into servitude. The first man who bethought himself of saying, "This is mine," and found World Revolution found people simply enough to believe him was the real founder of civil society. What crimes, what wars, what murders, what miseries and horrors would be have separated the human race who, snatching away the spades and filling in the ditches, had cried out to his fellows, Be aware of listening to this impostor. You are lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to all and the earth to no one. In this world, the word principle of communism is to be found. There is a certain substratum of truth in Rousseau's indictment of civilization, a substratum common to all dangerous errors. For if there were no truth at the bottom of false philosophers, they would obtain no credence, and thus could never constitute a menace to the world. Rousseau's gigantic error was to argue that because there are certain evils attendant on civilization, therefore civilization is wrong from the beginning. As well may one point to a neglected patch in a garden and say, see the results of cultivation. In order to remedy the evils of the existing social system, more civilization, not less, is needed. Civilization in its higher aspects, not in the mere acquisition of the physical amenities of life, or even of artistic and scientific knowledge, but in the sphere of moral aspiration, is all that separates man from the brute, destroys civilization in its entirety, and the human race sinks to the level of the jungle, in which the only law is that of the strong over the weak, the only incentive the struggle for material needs. For although Rousseau's injunction, go back into the woods and become men, may be excellent advice if interpreted as temporary measure, go back into the woods and remain there, is a counsel for anthropoid apes. It would be idle, however, to refuse the folly of Rousseau's theories, to show that in nature communism does not exist, that the first creature to establish the law of property was not man staking out his claim, but the first bird appropriating the branch of a tree whereon to build its nest, the first rabbit selecting the spot wherein to burrow out his hole, a right that no other bird or rabbit has ever dreamed of disputing. Discourse who initiate these conditions. As to the distribution of the fruits of the earth, one has only to watch two thrushes on the lawn disputing over a worm to see how the question of food supply is settled in primitive society. Nothing could be more absurd than Rousseau's conception of ideal barbarians living together on the principle of do as you would be done by. Only a dreamer utterly unacquainted with the real conditions of primitive life, the life ruled by the strongest, the pitiless, preying on the weak and helpless, could have conjured up such a vision. Even 18th century France, with all its avidity for novelty and its dreams of a return to nature, never regarded the primitive utopia of Rousseau's in the light of an attainable ideal. And it is inconceivable that the philosophy of the discourse sought inequality should have led to the attempt to overthrow civilization in 1793, as that the mockeries of Voltaire should have led to the feast of reason and the discretion of the churches. The teaching of Rousseau never reached the people to any appreciable extent. His influence was confined to the aristocracy and bourgeoisie, and it was certainly not the hyper-civilized habitus of the salons, nor the prosperous bourgeois of the provinces. Nor indeed was it Rousseau himself, living on the boundary of the most dissolute amongst the rich and sharing their vices, who would have welcomed the return to original conditions of life. The salons toyed with the philosophy of Rousseau as they toyed with any new thing. Mesmerism, Martinism, magic, whilst the disgruntled members of the middle class who took him seriously used by his theories merely as a lever of stirring up hatred against the class by which they believed themselves to be slighted, and never dreamed of emulating the Caribbean savages held up to their admiration by the exponent of primitive equality. On the Indian frontier, where still today no laws exist, the inhabitants are obliged to resort to the plan of building towers reached only by ladders, wherein to sleep at night, and by ascending into these refuges and pulling the ladders up after them, they are able to slumber in comparative security from assassination. Equality of wealth is maintained by the same primitive methods. How do you prevent anyone getting too rich? A regional inquiry of an inhabitant of the Swat Valley, where a rudimentary form of communism is carried out. We cut his throat. His throat was the brief reply. It is not then to the philosophers, but to the source whence they drew many of their inspirations, that the great dynamic force of the revolution must be attributed. Rousseau and Voltaire were Freemasons. The encyclopedia was published under the auspices of the same order. Without this powerful aid, the drawing-room doctrinaires of the 18th century could no more have wrote about the mighty cataclysm of 1789 that could the Fabian Society have produced the world revolution of today. The organization of the secret society was needed to transform the theorizings of the philosophers into a concrete and formidable system for the destruction of civilization. In order to trace the origin of these sects, it would be necessary to go back quite 6th century before the first French Revolution. As early as 1185, an order had been formed, calling itself the Conférence des Pays, with the main object of putting an end to wars, but also with the idea of establishing community of land. In their attacks on the nobles and clergy, the conference thus expressed their belief in the system now known as a nationalization. By what right do they invade the goods that should be common to all, such as the meadows, the woods, the game that runs about the fields and forests, the fish that people the rivers and the ponds, gifts that nature destines equally to all her children? According to the conference, set out to destroy the chateaus and monasteries, but the nobles arming themselves in self-defense ended by destroying the confrérie. It will be seen, therefore, that Rousseau, in attacking the rights of property, was proclaiming a doctrine that had not only been preached, but which it had actually been attempted to put into practice in France 600 years earlier. The fact that the conferees of the 12th century had been thus summarily suppressed did not prevent the formation of other subversive sects. Early in the following century came the Albigeos, professing much the same. Martinez de Pasquale, by Papus, president of the Supreme Council of the Martinist Order, 1895, page 146. Recherches politiques historiques by Chevalier de Mallet, 1870. Illuminist doctrines. In 1250, a Hungarian ex-priest named Jacobi organized a crusade against the priests and nobles, and about the same day the Order of the Templars was founded in Jerusalem by certain gentilshommes of Picardy during the Crusades. On their return, the Franks, the Knights Templars, instituted themselves as a power independent of the monarchy, and under their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, rose against the authority of the king. Philip le Bel, in 1312, several of their number were arrested and accused, amongst other things, of spitting on the crucifix and of denying the Christ. In the course of their cross-examination, they declared that they had not been fully initiated in the statutes of the order, and that they suspected that there were two sorts, some that were shown to the public, others that were carefully hiding and were not even known to all the knights. Jacques de Molay and several of the leaders were executed, and according to the Chevalier de Mallet, those who have escaped the storm afterwards met in obscurity so as to reignite the ties that had united them, and in order to avoid fresh denunciations, they made use of allegorical methods which indicated the basis of their association in a manner unintelligible to the eyes of the vulgar. That's the origin of the French Masons. This last assertion finds further confirmation from the Martinist PEQCE, who explains that the Grand Chapter of French Freemasonry, founded in the 18th century, was constituted under the Templars. That's to say that their most eminent members are animated by the desire to avenge Jacobus Burgundus Molay and his companions for the assassination of which they were the victims on the part of two tyrannical powers, royalty and papacy. Meanwhile, Freemasonry in England had developed. Recherches Politiques et Historiques by Chevalier de Mallet, 1870. Martinez de Pasquale by PEQCE, page 140. In the above passage, I have only touched very briefly on the origins of continental Masonry, as the subject was recently fully dealt with the very interesting articles that appeared in the Morning Post during July 1920, under the title of The Cause of the War Unrest, and republished in pamphlet formed by Grant Richards. Sex War Revolution. Along quite different lines, this is not the place to discuss its aims or origins. Suffice it to say that although French Freemasonry of the Grand Lodge National derived from one of the same sources, the Confrérie of the Rose Croix, and received its first charters from the Grand Lodge of London, founded in 1717, the two orders must not be confounded. The craft masonry of Britain, which was largely a development of the real guild of working masons, has always retained the spirit of brotherly association and general benevolence which animated its founders, and has adhered throughout to the principle that nothing touching religion or government shall ever be spoken of in the lodge. In France, however, as in other continental countries, the lodge speedily became centers of political intrigue. The Grand Orient, founded in 1772, with the Duc de Chartres, later Philip Egalit, as it is Grand Masters, was an undeniable subversive body, and by a coalition with the Grand Chapter in 1786, acquired a far more dangerous character, for whilst the spirit of the Grand Oriented was frankly democratic, though not demagogic, the spirit of the Grand Chapter was revolutionary, but the revolution was to be accomplished above all of the benefit of the upper class. La haute bourgeoisie, with the people as its instrument. The brothers of the Templar Rite, that is to say, of the Grand Chapter, were thus the real fomenters of revolutions. The others were only docile agents. In the opinion of PEQCE and the contemporary Masons themselves, the revolution of 1789 was the outcome of this combination. Indeed, the influence of Freemasonry in the French Revolution cannot be denied by any honest inquiry into the cause of that great upheaval, and as we shall see later, the French Freemasons themselves proudly claimed the revolution as their work. It was thus that George Sand, herself a Mason for the Grand Orient from the beginning, admitted women to the order, wrote long afterwards, half a century before those days marked out by destiny. Robinson, Proofs of a Conspiracy, page 10. Illuminism 7. The French Revolution was fermenting in the dark and hatching below ground. It was maturing in the minds of believers to the point of fanaticism in the form of a dream of universal revolution. The socialist historian Louis Blanc, also a Freemason, has thrown much light on the question of these occult forces. We know, moreover, that George Sand was right in attributing to the secret societies the origin of the revolutionary war cry, liberty, equality, fraternity. Long before the revolution broke out, the formula, liberty and equality, had been current in the lodges of the Grand Orient, a formula that sounds wholly pacific, yet which holds within it a whole war of discord. For observe the contradiction. It is impossible to have complete liberty and equality. Then two are mutually exclusive. It is possible to have a system of complete liberty in which every man is free to behave as he pleases, to do what he will with his own, to rob or to murder, to live, that's to say, under the law of the jungle, ruled by the strongest, but there is no equality there. For one may have a system of absolute equality, of cutting everyone down to the same dead level, of crushing all incentive in men to rise above his fellows. But there is no liberty there. So Grand Orient Freemasonry, by coupling together two words forever incomparable, threw into the arena an apple of discord over which the world has never ceased to quarrel from that day to this, and which has throughout divided the revolutionary forces into two opposing camps. As to the word fraternity, which completes the Masonic formula, we find that this was added by a further secret society, the Martinistas, founded in 1754 by a Portuguese Jew Martinez Paschalis or Pasquali, who had evolved a system out of Gnosticism, Judaism, Christianity, and the philosophies of Greece and of the East. This order is split up into two branches, one continued by Saint Martin and disciple of Martinez, Paschalis, but also a Jacob Boehme and a fervent Christian, and the other a more or less revolutionary body by which the Lodge of the Philates was founded in Paris in World Revolution. In the book of Saint Martin, Des Erreurs et de la Vérité, published in 1775, the formula liberty, equality, and fraternity is referred to as the L'éternel Sacre. The Martinistas frequently referred to in French contemporary records as the Illuminés. Illuminés were in reality dreamers and fanatics. First, and must not be confounded with the order of the Illuminati of Bavaria that came into existence 22 years later. It is by this terrible and formidable sect that the gigantic plan of world revolution was worked out under the leadership of the man whom Louis Blanc has truly described as the profoundest conspirator that has ever existed. Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Illuminati, was born on the 6th of February 1748. His early training by the Jesuits had inspired him with a violent dislike for their order, and he turned into eagerness to the subversive teaching of the French philosophers and the anti-Christian doctrines of the Manichaeans. It is said that he was also indoctrinated into Egyptian occultism by a Satan merchant of unknown origin from Jutland named Colmer, who was traveling about Europe during the year 1771 in search of adepts. Weishaupt, who combined the practical German brain with the cunning of Machiavelli, spent no less than 5 years thinking out a plan by which all these ideas should be reduced to a system, and at the end of this period he had evolved the following theory. Civilization, Weishaupt held with Rousseau, was a mistake. It had developed along the wrong lines, and to this cause all the inequalities of human life were due. Man, he declared, is fallen from the condition of liberty and equality, the state of pure nature. He is under subordination and civil bondage, arising from the vice of men. This is the fallen original sin. The first step towards regaining the state of primitive liberty consisted in learning to do without things. Man must divest himself of all the trappings laid on him by civilization and return to nomadic. The Martinistas, whose tendencies were purely scientific, passed frequently for madmen and despised politics. Les sectes et sociétés secrets by the Comte de Contelos of Cateleu, 1863, page 152. Illuminism, condition even clothing, food, and fixed bodies should be abandoned. Necessarily, therefore, all arts and sciences must be abolished. Do the common science afford real enlightenment, real human happiness? Or are they not rather children of necessity, the complicated needs of a state contrary of nature, the invasion of vain and empty brains? Moreover, are not many of the complicated needs of civilization the means of retaining in power the mercantile class, Kaufmannschaft, which, if allowed any authority in the government, would inevitably end by exercising the most formidable and despotic power. You will see dictating the law to the universe, and from it will perhaps ensue the independence of one part of the world, the slavery of the other. For he is a master who can arouse and foresee, stifle, satisfy or lessen needs, and who can do that better than tradesmen. Once released from the bondage civilization imposes, men must then be self-governing. Why? Ask Weishaupt. Should it be impossible to the human race to attain its highest perfection, the capacity for governing itself? For this reason, not only should kings and nobles be abolished, but even a republican should not be tolerated, and the people should be taught to do without any controlling authority, any law, or any civil code. In order to make this system a success, it will be necessary only to inculcate in men a just and steady morality. And since Weishaupt professed the shared Rousseau's belief in the inherent goodness of human nature, this would not be difficult, and society may then go on peaceable in a state of perfect liberty and equality. For since the only real obstacle to human perfection lay in the restraints imposed on men by artificial conditions of life, their removal of this must inevitably restore him to his primitive virtue. Man is not bad except as he is made so by arbitrary morality. He is bad because religion, the state, and bad examples pervert him. It was necessary, therefore, to root out from his mind all ideas of a hereafter, all fear of retribution for evil deeds, and to substitute for these superstitions the religion of reason. When at least reason becomes the religion of men, then will the problem be solved. World Revolution. 10. After deliverance from the bondage of religion, the loosening of all social ties must follow. Both for family and national life must cease to exist so as to make of the human race one good and happy family. The origin of patriotism and the love of kindred are thus described by Weishaupt in the directions given to his hierophants in destruction of initiatives. At the moment when men united themselves into nations, they ceased to recognize themselves under a common name. Nationalism or national love took the place of universal love. With the division of the globe and its countries, benevolence restricted itself behind boundaries that it was never again to transgress. Then it became a virtue to spread out at the expense of those who did not happen to be under our dominion. Then, in order to attain this goal, it became permissible to despise foreigners and to deceive and to offend them. This virtue was called patriotism. That man was called a patriot, who was just towards his own people, was unjust to others, who blinded himself to the merits of foreigners and took for perfection the vices of his own country. So one sees that patriotism gave birth to localism, to the family spirit, and finally to egoism. Thus the origin of the states of governments of civil society was the seed of discord, and patriotism found its punishment in itself. Diminish, do away with this love of country, and men will once more learn to know and love each other as men. There will be no more partiality. The ties between hearts will unroll and extend. In these words, the purest expression of internationalism as it is expounded today, Weishaupt displayed an ignorance of primeval condition of life as profound as that of Rousseau. The idea of a Paleolithic man, whose skeleton is usually exhumed with a flint instrument or other weapon of warfare grasped in his hand, passing his existence in a state of universal love, is simple, ludicrous. It was not, however, in his diatribes against civilization that Weishaupt surpassed Rousseau, but in the plan he devised for overthrowing it. Rousseau had merely paved the way for revolution. Weishaupt constructed the actual machinery of revolution itself. It was on the 1st of May 1776 that Weishaupt 5 Illuminism. 5 years of meditation resulted in his founding the secret society that they named after bygone philosophical systems, the Illuminati. All the members were required to adopt classical names. Thus Weishaupt took that of Spartacus, the leader of an insurrection of slaves in ancient Rome. His principal ally, Herr von Zwick, private counselor to the Prince von Salm, became Caro. The Marquis de Constanza, Diomedes, Massenhausen, Ajax, Hertel, Marius, the Baron von Schockenstein, Mahomet, the Baron Mengenhofen, Silla, etc. The same way the names of places were changed to those celebrated in antiquity. Munich, the headquarters of the system, was to be known as Athens, Ingolstadt, the birthplace of Illuminism, as Ephesus, or to the adepts initiated into the inner mysteries of the order, as Eleusis, Heidelberg as Utica, Bavarias as Achaia, Suabia as Pannonia, etc. For greater secrecy in correspondence, the word Illuminism was to be replaced by the Cypher, and the word Lodge by the calendar also was to be reconstructed, and the months known by names suggestive of Hebrew origin, January as the main, February as being main, etc. For the letters of the alphabet, a complete code of figures was constructed, beginning with M as number 1 and working back to an A and to Z. The grades of the order were a combination of the grades of Freemasonry and the degrees belonging to the Jesuits. Weishaupt, as has already been said, detested the Jesuits by recognizing the efficiency of their methods in acquiring influence over the minds of their disciples. He conceived the idea of adopting their system to his own purpose. He admired, says the Abbé Barruel, the institutions of the founders of this order. He admired above all those laws, that regime of the Jesuits, which under one head made so many men dispersed all over the universe tend toward the same object. He felt that one might imitate their methods, whilst proposing to himself views diametrically opposed. He said to himself, "What all these men have done for altars and empires, why should I not do against altars and empires?" By the attraction of a German sect of this name professing Satanism, with which a Weishaupt order may have been connected, existed in the 15th century. Of mysteries, of legends, of adepts, why should not I destroy in the dark what they erect in the light of the day? Weishaupt at first entertained hope of persuading other ex-Jesuits to join the society, but having succeeded in enlisting only two, become more than ever the enemy of their order. And injunctions were given to his adepts to admit no Jews or Jesuits to the sects of the Illuminati unless by a special permission. Ex-Jesuits, he wrote emphatically, must be avoided as the plague. It was in the training of adepts what Weishaupt showed his profound subtlety. Proselytes were not to be admitted at once to the secret aims of Illuminism, but initiated step by step into the higher mysteries, and the greatest caution was to be exercised not to reveal to the novice doctrines that may be likely to revolt him. For this purpose, the initiators must acquire the habit of talking backwards and forwards, so as not commit themselves. One must speak, Weishaupt explained to the superiors of the order, sometimes in one way, sometimes in another, so that our real purpose should remain impenetrable to our inferiors. Thus to certain novices. The novices, Eco says, the Illuminati must profess to disapprove of revolutions and demonstrate the advantage of proceedings by peaceful methods toward the attainment of world domination. But to the Minerval, the plan of world power must not be revealed. On the contrary, one of the opening sentences in the initiation for this great runs as follows: after 2 years reflection, experience, intercourse, reading of the graduated writings and information, you will necessarily have formed the impression that the final aim in our society is nothing less than to win power and riches, to undermine secular or religious government, and to obtain the mastery of the world. His excuse accuses indeed. The passage then goes on to say vaguely that this is not the case, and that the order only demands to initiate the fulfillment of his obligations. Not must antagonism to religion be admitted. On the contrary, Christ was to be represented as the first author of Illuminism, whose secret mission was to restore to men the original liberty and equality they had lost in the fall. No one, the novice, should be told, pave so sure a way for liberty as our Grand Master Jesus of Nazareth. And if Christ exhorted his disciples to despise riches, it was in order to prepare the world for that community of goods that should do away with property. This device proved particularly successful not only with young novices, but with men of all ranks and ages. The most admirable thing of all, wrote Sir Spartacus triumphantly to Caro, is that great Protestant and Reformed theologians, Lutherans and Calvinists, who belong to our order really believe they see in the true and genuine mind of the Christian religion. Oh men, what cannot you be brought to believe? By this means, as Philo, the Baron von Kinaiki, later on pointed out, the order was able to tickle those who have a hankering for religion. It was not then until his admission to the higher grades that the adept was initiated into real intentions of Illuminism with regard to the religion. When he reached the grade of illuminated major or minor of a Scott Knight, Epopte or priest, he was told the whole secret of the order in a discourse by the initiator. Remember that from the first invitation which we have given you in order to attract you to us, we commenced by telling you that in the projects of our order there did not enter any designs against religion. You remember that such an assurance was given you when you were admitted into the ranks of our novices, and that was repeated when you entered into our Minerval Academy. You remember with what art, with what simulated respect we have spoken to you of Christ, of his gospel, but in the grace of greater Illuminism, of a Scotch Knight, and Epopte or priest, how we have to know to form from Christ's gospel that our reason, and from its religion that of nature, and from religion, reason, morality, and nature, to make the religion and morality of the rights of men, of equality and of liberty. We have had many prejudices to overcome in you before being able to persuade you that the pretended religion of Christ was nothing else than the work of priests, of imposture and of tyranny. If it be so with a religion so much proclaimed and admired, what are we think of other religions? Understanding that they have all the same fictions for their origin, that they are all equally founded on lying, error, chimera, and imposture. Behold our secret. If in order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, we have pretended to have the sole true religion, remember that the end justifies the means, that the wise ought to take all the means to do good which the weak take to do evil. Those which we have taken to deliver you, those which we have taken to deliver one day the human race from all religion, are nothing else than a pious fraud which we reserve to unveil one day in the grade of magus or philosopher illuminated. But all this was unknown to the novice, whose confidence, being won by the simulations of religion, was enjoined to strict obedience. Amongst the questions put to him were the following: if you came to discover anything wrong or unjust to be done under the order, what line would you take? Can you regard the good for the order as your own good? Will you give to our society the right of life and death? Do you bind yourself to absolute and unreserved obedience? And do you know the force of this undertaking? By way of warning as to the consequence of betraying the order, a forcible illustration was included in the ceremony of initiation. Taking a naked sword from the table, the initiator held the point against the heart of the novice with these words: if you are only a traitor and Perjurer, learn that all our brothers are called upon to arm themselves against you. Do not hope to escape or to find a place of safety. Wherever you are, shame, remorse, and the rage of our brothers will pursue you and torment you to the innermost recesses of your entrails. It will thus be seen that the liberty vaunted by the leaders of the Illuminati had no existence, and that iron discipline was in reality the watchword of the order. A great point impressed upon the adepts, of which we shall see the importance later, was that they should not be known as Illuminati. This rule was particularly enforced in the case of those described as enrollers. And by the way, attractive proselytes, they were further admonished to be irreproachable. The superiors of the order are to be regarded as the most perfect and enlightened of men. They must not even permit any doubts on their infallibility. Therefore, to the enrollers it was said, apply yourselves to inward and outward perfection, but also apply yourselves to the art of counterfeit, of hiding and masking yourselves when observing others, so as to penetrate into their minds. Die kunst zu erlernen, andere zu beobachten, und aus zu forschen. These precepts were summed up in the one phrase, keep silence, be perfect, mask yourselves. How far the founder of the order had himself attained perfection was subsequently revealed by the discovery of his papers, amongst which was found a letter from Weishaupt to Hertel in 1783, confessing that he had seduced his sister-in-law, and adding, I am therefore in danger of losing my honor and that reputation which gave me so much authority over our world. For a time, this reputation for perfectibility was successfully maintained for the benefit of the members, who would have been revolted by a breach of morality, and only those likely to be attracted by it were to be allowed to know of the laxity permitted by the order. Women were also to be enlisted as Illuminati. And therefore in danger. For a time, the reputation for perfectibility was successfully maintained for the benefit of the members, who would have been revolted by a breach of morality, and only those likely to be attracted by it were to be allowed to know of the laxity permitted by the order. Women were also to be enlisted as Illuminati by being given hints of emancipation. Through women, wrote Weishaupt, one may often work the best in the world. To insinuate ourselves with this and to win them over should be one of our cleverest studies. More or less they can all be led towards change by vanity, curiosity, sensuality, and inclination. From this can one draw much profit for the good cause. This sex has a larger part of the world in its hands. The female adepts were then to be divided into two classes, each with its own secret. The first to consist of virtuous women who would give an air of respectability to the order. The second of light women who would help to satisfy those brothers who have a penchant for pleasure. But the present utility of both classes would consist in providing funds for the society. Fools with money, whether men or women, were to be particularly welcomed. These good people wrote to Spartacus, to Ajax and Caro, swell our numbers and fill our money bags. Set yourselves to work. This gentleman must be made to enable a debate, but let us be aware of telling them our secrets. This sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last. The sect was thus to consist of Weishaupt and the adepts who had been initiated into the inner mysterious, and besides this, of a larger following of simply incredulous people who could be kept in ignorance of the real goal towards which they were being driven. Weishaupt's method for obtaining proselytes is thus shown by a diagram in the code of the Illuminati. A, B, and C. Reproduced from original frame of Illumination Ordering Search Abteilung. Naturally, the least educated classes offered a wide field of workshops activities. It is also necessary runs the code of the Illuminati to gain the common people, that germane bulk to our order. The great means to that end is the influence in the schools. One can also succeed, now by liberty, now by striking in effect, and at other times by humiliating oneself, by making oneself popular, or enduring with an air of passion, prejudice that one can gradually root out later. Espionage formed a larger part of Weishaupt's program. The adepts known as the Insinuating Brothers were enjoined to assume the role of observers and reporters. Every person shall be made a spy on another and on all around him. Friends, relations, enemies, those who are indifferent, all without exception, shall be the object of his inquiries. He shall attempt to discover their strong side and their weak, their passions, their prejudice, their connections, above all, their actions, in a word, the most detailed information about them. All this is to be entered on the tablets that the insinuant carries with him, and from which he shall draw up reports to be sending twice a month to his superiors, so that the order may know which are the people in each town and village to whom it can look for support. It is impossible not to admire the ingenuity of the system by which each section of the community was to be made to believe that it would reap untold benefits from Illuminism. Princes whose kingdoms were to be reft from them, priests and ministers whose religion was to be destroyed, merchants whose commerce was to be ruined, women who were to be reduced to the rank of squaws, peasants who were to be made to return to a state of savagery, were all by dividing up the secrets of the order into the watertight compartments, to be persuaded that in Illuminism alone lay their prosperity or salvation, secrecy being thus the great principle of his system. Weishaupt had not been slow to perceive the advantages offered by an alliance with Freemasonry. During the period when he was thinking out his plan, the real aims of Masonry were unknown to him. He only knew, says the Abbé Barruel, that the Freemasons held secret meetings. He saw them united by a mysterious link and recognizing each other as brothers by certain signs and certain words, to whatever nation or religion they belonged. He therefore conceived a new combination of which the result was to be a society adopting for its methods, as far as it suited him, the regime of the Jesuits and the mysterious silence, the obscure existence of the Masons. It was in 1777, nearly 2 years after he had founded the Order of the Illuminati, that Weishaupt became a Freemason, and towards the end of 1778 the idea was first launched of amalgamating the two societies. Cato, that is to say Herr von Zwack, who became a Mason on November 27, 1778, took the matter over with a brother Mason, the Abbé Marodi, to whom he confided the whole secret of Illuminism, and 2 years later a further understanding between Illuminism and Freemasonry was brought about by a certain Freemason, Freiherr von Koenig, who in July 1780 arrived at Frankfurt, where he met the Illuminatis Diomedes, the Marquis de Constanza, sent by the Bavarian Illuminati to establish colonies in Protestant countries. The two men compared notes on the aims of their respective societies, and Nigel expressed the wish to be received into the Order of the Illuminati. This met with the approval of Weishaupt, and Nigel, adopting the name of Philo, was thereupon initiated into the secrets of the first class of Illuminism. The minor was the zeal he displayed in obtaining a Proselytes delighted Spartacus Philo, he wrote, is the master from whom to take lessons. Give me 6 men of his stamp, and with them I will change the face of the universe. As a result of the negotiation between Weishaupt and Koenig, a kind of union was arranged between the two societies, and the Spartacus agreed to Illuminism, receiving the first 3 degrees of Masonry. On the 20th of December 1781, it was finally decided that the combined order should be composed of 3 classes: A. the Minervals, B. the Freemasons, and C. the Mystery class, which, as the highest of all, was divided into the lesser and greater mysteries, the former including the greatest of priests and regents, the latter the mags and the main kings. But it was not until the Congress of Wilhelmsbad that the alliance between Illuminism and the Freemasonry was finally sealed. This assembly, of which the importance to the subsequent history of the world has never been appreciated by historians, met for the first time on the 16th of July 1782, and including the representatives of all the secret societies, Martinistes as well as Freemasons and Illuminati, which now numbered no less than 3 million members all over the world. Amongst these different orders, the Illuminati of Bavaria alone had formulated a definite plan of campaign, and it was they who henceforward took the lead. What passed at this terrible Congress will never be known to the outside world, for even those men who had been drawn unwittingly into the movement and now heard for the first time the real designs of the leaders, were on their oath to reveal nothing. One such honest Freemason, the Committee de Berieux, a member of Martiniste Lodge at Lyons, on returning from the Congress, the Wilhelmsbad, could not conceal his alarm, and when questioned on the tragic secrets he had brought back with him, replied, "I will not confide them to you. I can only tell you that all this is very much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which is being moving is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape from it. From this time onwards," says his biographer, M. Costa de Beauregard, the committee, the video could only speak at Freemasonry with horror. The years of 1781 and 1782 were remarkable for the growth of another movement which found expressions at the Congress, the Wilhelmsbad, namely the Emancipation of the Jews. During these years, a wave of pro-Semitism was produced throughout Europe by Dong, the great book upon the civil amelioration of the condition of the Jews, writing under the influence of Moses Mendelssohn and finished in August 1781. It was thus, wrote A. Lehman, that 8 years before the revolution, the program in favor of Judaism was sent out by the Prussia. This book had a considerable influence on the revolutionary movement. It is the trumpet call of the Jewish cause, the signal for the step forward. Graetz, the Jewish historian, himself recognized the immense importance of Dogma's work, painting the Christians as cruel barbarians and the Jews as illustrious martyrs. All thinking people, he adds, now began to interest themselves in the Jewish question. Mirabeau, a few years later, on a mission to Berlin, formed a friendship with Dog and became an habitué of the salon of a young and beautiful Jew, Henriette de Le Mans, wife of Dr. Herz, and it was there that the disciples of Mendelssohn, who had just died, pressed him to raise his voice in favor of the oppressed Jews, with the result that the Mirabeau published a book in London on the same lines as Dogmas. Meanwhile, in 1781, Anacharsis Claude, the future author of La Repubblica Universelle, wrote his pro-Semitic pamphlet called Lettres sur les Juifs. The result of these agitations was seen later in the edicts passed through the influence of Mirabeau and the Abbé Gregory by the National Assembly in 1791, decreeing the emancipation of the Jews. A more immediate effect, however, was the resolution taken at the Masonic Congress of Wilhelmsbad, which was attended by Lessing and company of Jews, that henceforth Jews should no longer be excluded from the lodge. At the same time, it was decided to remove the headquarters of Illuminati Freemasonry to Frankfurt, which incidentally was the stronghold of Jewish finance, controlled at this date by such leading members of the race as Rothschild, Meyer, Amschel, later to become a Rothschild also, Oppenheimer, Weisheimer, Schuster, Speyer, Stern, and others. At this head lodge of Frankfurt, the gigantic plan of world revolution was carried forward, and it was there that at the large Masonic Congress in 1786, two French Freemasons afterwards declared the deaths of Louis XVI and Gustavus III of Sweden were definitely decreed. From the moment of the Great Coalition effected at the Wellsband, Illuminism, aided largely by the activities of Nagy, was able to extend its ramification all over Germany. The Lodge of the Ex-Studied under Mahomet, the Baron Schoenstein, illuminated Bayreuth, and other imperial towns, Berlin under Nikolai and Liechtenstein, illuminated the provinces of Brandenburg and Pomerania, Frankfurt illuminated Hanover, and so on. All these branches were controlled by the 12 leading adepts, headed by Weishaupt, who at the lodge in Munich held in his hands the threads of the whole conspiracy. Cowan the X-rays in Freemasonry, page 122, Archives of Israelites, 1867, page 466. A. De la Rive, La Juie Dance, La Frank McConaughey, page 36. Hitherto Jews had only been admitted into the lodges of the Order of Melchizedek, of which the three principal grades are given by the Marquis de Luchet as the first, the Forest initiates the SE, second, the Martyrs the Sages, third, the Predes Royalus, the very labels, Fredes Rosicrucians, or the grade of Melchizedek. The Fredes initiated the Asia were an order of which the hieroglyphics were taken from Hebrew. The supreme direction was called the Small and Constant Sanhedrin of Europe. Isaïe sur la secta de Illuminis, 1789, page 212. Lombard de Langres says this secret society became affiliated to Illuminism, that the center was at Hamburg, and that only the Grand Master knew the whole secret. The Society's Secrets in Allemagne, page 182. Werner Sombart, the Jews and the Modern Capitalism, page 187. Charles Héricourt, La Revolution, page 104. But dissensions had now begun amongst the two principal leaders, Weishaupt and Knieg. Both were indeed born intriguers, but whilst Weishaupt preferred to work in the dark and wrap himself in mystery, Knieg loved to make a noise in the world and to meddle with everything. It was inevitable that two such men could not continue to work together harmoniously, and before long Knieg's persistent attempts to pry into Weishaupt's secrets and to usurp a share of his glory roused the animosity of his chief, who ended by depriving Knieg of his post as director of the provinces and placing him a subordinate position, whereat Philo, on the 20th of January 1783, wrote indignantly to Caro, "It is the Jesuitry, the Weishaupt, that causes all our division. It is the despotism that he exercises over men perhaps less rich than himself in imagination, in roses, in cunning. I declare that nothing can put me on the same footing with the Spartacus as that one which I was at first." As a matter of fact, Knieg was no way behind Weishaupt in what he described as Jesuitry, but revolted by the tyranny of his leader, he finally left the Illuminati in anger and disgust. "I abhor treachery and profligacy," he wrote again to Caro, "and I leave him to blow himself and his order into the air." Public opinion had now, however, become thoroughly roused on the subject to the society, and the Elector of Bavaria, informed of the danger to the state constituted by its adepts, who were said to have declared that the Illuminati must in time rule the world, publishing an edict forbidding all secret societies. In April of the following year, 1785, 4 other Illuminati who, like Nigi, had left the society disgusted by the tyranny of Weishaupt, were summoned before a court of inquiry to give an account of the doctrines and methods of the SECT. The videos of these men, Ochenader, Cossendey, Gromberger, and Renner, all professors of the Marian Academy, left no further room for doubt as to the diabolical nature of Illuminism. All religion, they declare, all love of country and loyalty to sovereignty were to be a favorite maxim of the order being. These were to be annihilated, a favorite maxim of the order being. Tous les rois et tous les prêtres sont des fripons et des traîtres. Moreover, every effort was to be made to create discord not only between princes and their subjects, but between ministers and their secretaries, and even between parents and children, while suicide was to be encouraged by inculcating in men's minds the idea that the act of killing oneself afforded certain voluptuous pleasures. Espionage was to be extended even to the post by placing adepts in the post office who possessed the art of opening letters and closing them again without fear of detection. Robinson, who studied all the biddings of the 4 professors, thus sums up the plan of Weishaupt as revealed by them. The order of the Illuminati adjured Christianity and advocated sensual pleasures. In the lodges that was declared an eternal sleep, patriotism and loyalty were called narrow-minded, prejudiced, and incompatible with the universal benevolence. Further, they accounted all princes, usurpers, and tyrants, and all privileged orders as their abettors. They mean to abolish the laws which protect the property accumulated by long-continued and successful industry, and to prevent for the future any such accumulation. They intended to establish universal liberty and equality, the imprescriptible rights of men, and as necessary preparation for all this they intended to root out all religion and ordinary morality, and even to break the bonds of domestic life by destroying the veneration for marriage vows, and by taking the education of children out of the hands of the parents, reduced to a simple formula the aims of the Illuminati, by the summarized in the following 6 points. First, abolition of monarchy and all other government. Second, abolition of private property. Third, abolition of inheritance. Fourth, abolition of patriotism. Professor Proof of Conspiracy, page 106 or 7. 5. Abolition of the family, of marriage and all morality, and the institution of the communal education of children. 6. Abolition of all religion. Now it will surely be admitted that the above forms of programming hitherto unprecedented in the history of civilization. Communistic theories have been held by isolated thinkers or groups of thinkers since the days of Plato, but no one, as far as we know, had ever yet seriously proposed to destroy everything for which civilization stands. Moreover, when, as we shall see, the plan of Illuminism as confided by the above 6 points has continued up to the present day to form the exact programming of the world revolution, how can we doubt that the whole movement originated with the Illuminati or with secret influence at work behind them? Here a curious point arises. Was Weishaupt the inventor of his system? We know that he was indoctrinated in occultism by Colbert, but beyond this we can discover nothing. If indeed Weishaupt himself thought out his whole plan of world revolution, the gigantic conception as it is described by Louis Blanc, how it's that so vast a genius should have remaining absolutely unknown to posterity? How is it that succeeding groups of world revolutionaries whilst all following in his footsteps, even those who we know positively to have belonged to his order, never once have referred to the source of their inspiration? It's not the answer to the later questions that throughout the movement the adepts of the order have always adhered to the stringent rule laid down by Weishaupt that they should never allow themselves to be known as Illuminati. The persistent efforts to conceal the very existence of the order, or if this proves impossible to represent it as an important philanthropic movement, has continued up to the very year in which I write. With regard to the philanthropic nature of Illuminism, it's only necessary to consult the original writings of Weishaupt to realize the hollowness of this assurance amongst the whole correspondence which passed between Weishaupt and his adepts laid bare by the government of to suppress the truth about its subsequent activities. The truth is that not until Illuminism had been apparently extinguished in Bavaria was it able to make its formidable influence felt abroad, and public anxiety being allayed, it could secretly extend its organization over the whole civilized world. Well, that's it for now. First chapter. I hope in the future we'll share more about this book, about this kind of plan that this guy have had it in the past. Now we have to open the eyes and make a difference. Have a blessed day. Bye bye.